In episode 8, Joe starts looking into the swinging lifestyle, or the open relationship lifestyle. He still can't believe that this thing actually fell into his lap. But upon reading about it, if your relationship isn't on rock-solid footing, this whole swinging lifestyle is never going to work. He doesn't care, though. After the conversation he had with Dottie, he knows that love is pretty volatile, and he doesn't want to end up dead. He ends up trying to poke around about Love's first marriage, asking if her and James had ever done anything like that, but she says, no. We weren't too far into our first marriage when he got sick. We were planning on having a baby, but then he got cold feet. Through this conversation, Joe is convinced that Love actually did murder this guy. Both Joe and Love realize, though, this isn't really them, and Joe wants to do more research into it. And by research, I mean asking Dante if him and his partner have ever swung. And it turns out, yeah, they had a threesome once, and it wasn't Dante's idea, it was his husband's. Dante tells Joe, I was willing to do anything for this man because I loved him. They get interrupted, though, when Marion comes over because she got an exciting phone call from a very famous editor from a children's magazine congratulating her on being a finalist in that illustration contest. The thing is, Marion didn't enter it. She missed the deadline. So she asks for a moment alone with Joe, and she yells at him because this wasn't his thing to do. Joe, however, knowing she missed the deadline and knowing she wanted to enter, took it upon himself to enter it because he figures the world needs to see her art. She's mad that he kind of overstepped boundaries, but she's also extremely excited, so she can't stay mad too long. When Joe gets home that night, he heads up to bed with Love, and Love starts trying to, but Joe just doesn't really seem interested. They start having a conversation about how boring their sex life has gotten. And that leads into saying, maybe we should meet with the Conrads just to get some questions answered and do our research. And this is exactly what Joe wants. He don't want to push Love into this. He wants it to be her idea. So they call Sherry and Carrie up, and Sherry and Carrie head on over to the bakery the next day with an NDA. They tell Love and Joe that this is standard procedure. While they can't confirm or deny, they've slept with a lot of couples in Madre Linda. Everybody's tried the lifestyle at least once. The conversation goes from a quick Q&A with actually the Conrads asking more Q's than answering A's to planning this thing out and who hooks up with who. And everything's going fine. Everybody's willing to hook up with everybody. Joe is even willing to hook up with Carrie. But when Joe gets asked if he's willing to hook up with Sherry, he instinctively says no because Love has a propensity of killing women that he hooks up with. But Love says she's fine with it at the same time, and that freaks out the Conrads a bit. They get up, pull the NDA, and say, call us when you're on the same page. The next day at work, Joe is filling up the shelves when he sees Marion practicing with Dante about what she's going to say to the judge. And she's nervous, and Dante's being really hard on her. He's doing that because he's well educated with a Harvard degree. And him and his husband are having problems adopting, so he knows what she's up against. She needs to be perfect. But Marion's stressed out because she just has the feeling that Ryan is planning something. She just doesn't know what it is. When the practice is over, Marion pulls Joe aside and asks him if he'd be willing to come as a character witness in her behalf. And of course, Joe is more than willing to do that. She gives him a hug and they almost get close to kissing, but they don't. Joe at least now has hope. Joe heads home and he gets a weird text message from Love that just says, quit it. And he says, quit what? She says, staring at me while I read. And this is actually in the book that Joe read about open relationships. Start off with things like fantasies. So Love is trying to do that. He stares outside to see Love reading sensually, I'll call it. I didn't know that was a thing, honestly, until this show, but hey, here I am. Joe, however, can't really do anything about it because all of a sudden a football flies into the yard and it's Theo using any excuse whatsoever to come see Love. Normally in a situation like this, Love would right out the gate let him know that Joe is home, but she doesn't do that. Knowing that Joe is watching her, she hits on Theo pretty hard. Eventually, Theo does notice that they are being watched, so he heads back home. But Love walks in and says, how'd you feel about that? And the truth is, Joe felt nothing about it. He's no longer interested in Love, but he says possessive. They start hooking up right then and there, and then Joe ends up giving Love some mouth fun. When she's done orgasming, Joe comes up for air and she says, Joe, do you think our relationship is solid? I think it's rock solid. And out of nowhere, she says, why don't you call the sitter and I'll text Sherry. So the next night, the Conrads are coming over. And boy, do they come over. I mean, like, they bring a trunk of toys. The wine starts flowing, and then it kind of kicks off. Love and Sherry hooking up, but Joe can tell that Love is kind of scared about this whole situation. Carrie, however, tells Joe, why don't we head up to the bedroom and I can show you what I set up? Because Carrie's bisexual, and this is Joe's hell. But the whole time, he's just thinking about one person, Marion. When Carrie and Joe head upstairs, there are toys laid out, and Joe is terrified that Carrie's going to use any of these on him. And then Carrie pulls out a kit of pills and serums and just anything to keep it hard for a long, long time. Carrie then strips down in front of Joe, gives him a hug, but that's it, because he turns around and starts jerking it to himself in the mirror, saying that if you're not attracted to yourself, how is anyone else supposed to be attracted to you? He tells Joe to pull up a mirror, but Joe gets a phone call from Marion, and it is a welcome distraction. Even though he's not supposed to have any cell phones, he does, and he ends up taking it at the behest of Carrie, who is really close to, well, he really finds himself attractive, let's put it that way. When Joe answers the phone call, Marion is hysterical because an anonymous person emailed all of her contacts some scandalous photos, and she knows that it was Ryan, and Joe knows exactly what photos she's referring to. One of the people that the photos were sent to was that editor for that children's magazine. Marion called to kind of get a pep talk. She doesn't have many friends, and Joe is the right person to give her that pep talk. She then asks Joe, do you want to come over? Because I really could use a friend. But Joe's kind of in the middle of something, and while he wants to so badly, he can't leave. He gets off the phone, and Carrie takes his phone, putting it with the others, and then heading to the bedroom where Love and Sherry are having a ball, and the alcohol has clearly hit Love. The couples then split up, Love going with Carrie, and Joe going with Sherry. But Carrie and Love don't hook up. Carrie turns Love around and says, you watch them. And as Sherry is kissing all up on Joe, she tells him, look at Love. But while Joe is looking at Love, he's thinking about Marion. This includes when Sherry gets on top of him and puts something inside her. He's still thinking about Marion the entire time. Love goes from kind of being turned on to all of a sudden being very uncomfortable to the point where she screams the safe word, Hakuna Matata. Love runs downstairs, and Joe puts on some clothes and chases after her, and he's thinking, how am I the bad guy in this situation? But it's because Love knows him so well that she knows he was thinking about somebody else. Joe, of course, denies that there's anybody else, but Love tells him, I know you. I guess I'm just never going to be good enough. The couple start fighting about their sex life and how Love felt like she had to do something. And it gets pretty contentious with Love screaming, well, I had to do something because I didn't want you getting bored and finding another Natalie. Joe tries to calm her down because she's screaming, but Love says, what, you don't want to hear the truth? Our marriage is completely one-sided. You made me kill her. In addition to being Mother of the Year, I killed Natalie for you. And Joe grabs her to shut her up. After a second or two, Love realizes what she said. And now Love and Joe are wondering, did Carrie and Sherry hear it? There's only one way to find out. They head upstairs. And at first, they seem pretty normal, but then they start giving off signs that they did hear it. Sherry gives a signal to Carrie to run, and he pushes Joe aside and tries to run downstairs to grab a phone, but Joe heads after him. Love stays with Sherry and tries to disarm her, and Joe is left to battle with the Madre Linda version of a Grecian god. But Joe uses what he has at his disposal, things like knives and shards of glass. And when Carrie heads outside, Joe grabs the hunting bow that Carrie gifted him. As Joe is trying to track down Carrie like he's the protagonist in a most dangerous game, he's thinking the whole time how this ends. If he gets killed, Love goes to prison, Henry grows up in the system, just like he did. Luckily, that won't be happening, though, because somehow Joe Goldberg hits Carrie with an arrow. He runs up to him, knocks him out by hitting him with a rock, and drags his body back inside. He meets back up with Love, who has also been able to knock out Sherry. Now they have to take both bodies over to the bakery and put them in the cage. After they lock them in, Love jumps all over Joe, and they have arguably the best sex they've ever had. It's at this moment that Joe realizes that their love language is violence. So it was a pretty exciting night in Joe's house. It wasn't all dull next door. Theo needed to come up with some kind of plan to get the information that Matthew had on Joe and Love. So he shut the breaker off. It forced Matthew to actually come outside for the first time in weeks, months. Forces Matthew and Theo to have a conversation about how each other are doing. And Theo tells him, the human body wasn't meant to just sit in an office, never getting sunlight. You need to, get out. So Matthew suggests the two get tacos together, but Theo makes an excuse that he needs to email some of his old professors because he's thinking about going back to school. It excites Matthew so much that he says, you know what, I'll pick you something up. And that frees up Theo to head into Matthew's office. But when he pulls up Love and Joe's file, there's a video. And the video shows Joe punching the wall. It's when Joe had just found out about the budding relationship between Love and Theo. Theo is completely disgusted. He feels like he now has proof that Love is in an abusive relationship. He's caught, though, by Matthew, who either made the quickest taco trip in the world or never left at all. Theo asks, what is this? And Matthew fills him in that he's tapped into Madre Linda's security system. Matthew tells Theo, I wouldn't be looking at Love if she wasn't connected to Natalie, or you? What exactly is it you think you're doing with Love Quinn? They start getting into an argument about Theo's relationship with Love and Matthew's hunch that Love might have had something to do with Natalie's murder. This argument gets really heated with Theo yelling, "You need to move on. She's dead. She is dead. Get over it." You don't quite say that to someone who's still grieving, so Matthew ends up kicking Theo out of the house. This argument with Theo ends up sparking something in Matthew to get lit up that night. He is plastered. And at 5 in the morning, he ends up stumbling outside to find Joe cleaning up blood from his car. Although Joe plays it off like it was spilled fruit sauce. Matthew starts questioning about what was going on the previous night because he's pretty sure he heard somebody scream, but Joe plays it off like it was nothing more than just drunken shenanigans. While Matthew is clearly suspicious, luckily for Joe, he's also clearly drunk. The next day, Joe has to get to the custody hearing, and both Joe and Dante think that Marion crushed it. But that's when they see something pretty alarming. It's the fact that Ryan is friendly with the judge. At this moment, Joe truly sees how corrupt the judicial system can be. Joe now knows that as long as Ryan's in the picture, Marion's always going to lose. After leaving the courts, he heads to the bakery, and he arrives just in time to see Sherry and Carrie wake up and are banging for somebody to help them. But this bonding experience, we'll call it, has really put a wrench in Joe's plans because Love is into him more than ever now. And that's when Joe looks down the baby monitor and thinks to himself, how in the world are these two going to get out of there alive? Thank you so much for checking out this recap. Please consider subscribing to the channel. Hit thumbs up if you liked it. Smash that thumbs down button if you thought this sucked. Make sure to be nice in the comment section. If you don't see the next video up in the end screen there, I'll get it up in a few days, not to worry. And I have merchandise, so go buy a mug or something. It's never too early to think about Christmas gifts, folks. Once again, thank you for checking out this recap.